Now, before we have a look at some CIFS examples, let's first have a little introduction with some slides. CIFS, or server message block, I should say, has file-level access. That's the same as with NFS. Your client has no administrative control over the file system other than managing files in that particular file system. In order to get to the volume, the client will have to map a drive letter to a share name. So the client will need a share name, and you as an administrator will have to make a connection between the share name and a path name. Remember, with NFS you only had to make sure that there was a path name inside the namespace that would allow for access to the volume. With CIFS you have to connect the path name to a share name, and the client will use the share name. On top of that, the root volume of your storage virtual machine by default will have some shares, which are hidden shares. $C$ is the root volume itself. So a client can access $C$, and by doing that it will access the root volume of your storage virtual machine. And next to that there are two more shares, which are IPC and admin, and these are internal shares. These are for internal use by the cluster itself. Your storage virtual machine will have to be added to the Active Directory computer list. So that means that sometimes it's called a member server. Your storage virtual machine is responsible for authentication of users that access the volume in the ONTAP environment. So in order to be able to do that, if you want to do that, you will need a username and a password for the AD user that is entitled to create computers. If you're not allowed to do that by yourself, you would have to ask an administrator in the AD environment to create a computer for you and give you access to it. Very important, your time skew may be no more than 5 minutes. If your time skew is more than 5 minutes, then Kerberos will start protesting and you will not be able to create your CIFS environment successfully. So that's very important. In order to be able to keep within that particular 5 minutes time skew, it is necessary to specify a time server. Using the NTP protocol, you have to create an entry that will keep your time in sync with a Stratum server or with another time server. And last but not least, your storage virtual machine will also need a DNS entry. So you would have to be able to resolve your domain name servers. You'd have to be able to resolve the Active Directory environment by creating a DNS domain entry. So again, client access means that your client will need something which is called a share, and it will have to connect the share to a drive letter, and the share is connected to a path name that you as an administrator provide, and the path name obviously is a junction path that will lead you to the volume. So in summary, the share has a path name and a share name, and the client accesses the share name. Once you got your CIFS server up and running, you can stop it, meaning you close all sessions. You can also close your sessions at the session level. And obviously, you can show your shares and show your sessions, or even show which files are used in a session. Now let's have a look at an example. So we're logged into the cluster shell and we will set the time zone. To start with, I will select Europe Amsterdam. Then I set up the NTP server, and the NTP server is going to be my Active Directory domain controller. And I specify version auto, which means that I let the SVM and NTP server figure out by themselves which version to use. Possible versions are 3 and 4. But if I would choose 3 and the NTP server does not talk 3, then I would not be able to set up NTP successfully. Now that we've set up the time zone and the NTP server, we will create the DNS entry in the SVM, add the computer to Active Directory, create a volume and mount the volume, then we create a share, and obviously in Windows we will start using the share after we've done that. Now the IP address that we configured for this SVM is 223. and that's the one that we'll be accessing from our Windows client later. Now, the allowed protocols for this storage virtual machine are the default, which is all of the protocols that are available for any SVM in our cluster, which is NFS, CIFS, Fibre Channel, iSCSI, and NDMP. We just want to allow for NFS and CIFS, so we have to change this by specifying the allowed protocols to be NFS and CIFS only. Let's do that. So now we've only got NFS and CIFS that are allowed. Then we check the LIFS protocols. So what are the allowed data protocols for this particular LIF? We've only got one LIF, so that's obvious. And as you can see, the only allowed data protocol is CIFS. So even though we have enabled NFS for the SVM, via this LIF, NFS protocol will not be supported. So if we would want to, then we'd have to add another LIF and specifying the NFS protocol for that particular LIF. So first, as we agreed, we have to create a DNS entry. And our DNS server is the Active Directory domain controller again. And obviously the domain name is netapp.local. Starts complaining about only having one DNS server, we are going to leave it at that. This is not the best idea, but we're not going to bother with that now. So first we create the CIFS server. We specify the name of the vServer, and we specify the name of the computer entry that we want to add to the domain netapp.local. And now we have to specify the administrator, or at least the user that's allowed to create a computer in AD, specify the password, and then if everything is okay, it will create a computer in Active Directory, and we're done with creating the CIFS SVM. SMB version 1 is disabled, and we're going to leave it at that. So now we create the volume, which will have the junction path /CIFS, which is going to be the path that we need for the share. So don't forget that. And as you can see that we have no export policy entry. We don't necessarily need that, so we're not going to do that. But what we are going to do is we are going to create a share. And the share will have the name CIFS1 and the path name is /CIFS1. Then we look at the shares that we have for this storage virtual machine, and it is CIFS1, which is the share. Everybody has full control by default. And we also see IPC, admin, and $, which are the hidden shares, as we discussed. Now what we do, we log into our Windows environment. We map a drive name, in this case T, to our dcifs SVM with CIFS1 as the share name. Obviously, to prove that we actually are able to write, because everybody has full control, we change directory to the T drive, and we create a small file with some text in it. And there's the file. So let's have a look at our session. And as you can see, our vServer dcifs has one share that is used by address 247 via the LIF 223. And we're done.